Hello there. Hope everybody's doing good and doing well. There's a difference. My voice is going to be raspier than normal because yesterday I started getting this nasty sinus headache pressure, and today my nasopharynx is sore. So I'm doing all the usual home remedies and all that, but I'm not sure how long my voice will hold out today. And good to see everybody here. I think I shouted everybody out so far except Unicorn Lead the Rise that just showed up. But hopefully this will go well. And I'm pretty sure I did this topic before, but I don't remember when or where. So we'll do it again, and it keeps coming up. As far as the events of the last week go, maybe I can say more if I have the voice for it later at the end, but we all know it's a big fraud, and on my social WordPress site, I cited an article I think pretty well sums up what a lot of us are thinking about the whole thing. So, and as we all know, if we lived in a free world, we could say whatever we want and not worried about the channel getting taken down, but we do live in a technocracy, and they tend to prefer candidates and quote-unquote leaders who are the most demented and immoral and shallow people they can find. So that's the world we live in, but prophetic times. So anyway, better get right into this. The Phantom Time Hypothesis, the greatest fiction ever written. So the link for this is in the description if you wanted to follow along. I'm looking at the PDF version of it. I downloaded a printable version, and I'm using that to show on screen just because I don't have to skip ad spaces and all that. So thanks for the link there, Chow. Anyway, let's get right into this. This is from July, not too long ago, by someone called Wagner. Most researchers and scholars praise the importance of studying history, but this phantom time hypothesis contradicts the reliability of written history and asks key questions. What if it turned out that some of what we learned in Western schools was nothing but a fictional fabrication? What if 300 years of European medieval history was completely fabricated to portray a few rulers as favored children of God, awaiting the second coming of the Lord Jesus Christ? The phantom time hypothesis asserts that 297 years of history from 614 to 911 AD were completely fabricated by the Catholic Church. As outlandish and fantastic as these claims may seem, it is worth examining existing theories that favor these radical historical views. After all, history is always written from the perspective of the victor, and rarely by those defeated. Perhaps history is the greatest fiction ever written. And I would just say also that this is there's always going to be historical lies. There are current lies. I mean, everything officialdom of any sort puts out is going to contain some degree of lies. And we just know that. It's naive to think otherwise. But the thing is that it's gone off the rails or gone on steroids, however you want to put it, that this is a big deal. So we can't just brush it aside. So we're going to look at it, and I have to tell you after reading this article that there are some interesting twists that it brings out. That's just why I'm showing it. So again, for those of you who just came, sorry about all the throat clearing, but I'm trying to get through this today with a sore throat, and lots of sinus pressure. Anyway, brief history of the phantom time hypothesis. According to some people, this was a new thing, a new discovery that conspiracy theorists finally uncovered. Nothing of the sort is true. It at least goes back to 1994. The German historian Herbert Illig, I guess is how you pronounce it, something like that, published a paper. I'm not going to read the German stuff here. The Invented Middle Ages, the greatest forgery in history. The paper claims that a conspiracy between the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII, Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, and Catholic Pope Sylvester II resulted in a fabrication of history. That is to say, these three people made up the Middle Ages. Hi also to Mark and Rachel. I think I missed them. So, are the Middle Ages made up? This conspiracy theory centers on the claim that the Anno Domini calendar system, the year of our Lord, that's what it means in Latin, was manipulated such that Otto III's reign began in 1000 AD, which suited the narrative of the start of a new Christian millennium. As a result of its adjustment, medieval chroniclers had to write 297 years of fictional history to hide the time manipulation. Illig's theory also claims that the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII ordered his scribes and monks to rewrite and alter all the small texts and pieces from the Greek maiuscula, I'm not even familiar with that word, and previous history books to align with the Holy Roman Emperor's desired timeline. But why would they work together for the benefit of only Otto III remains a mystery. So there's one little red flag going up in this theory. Illig believed that in 1582, Pope Gregory VIII abandoned the Julian calendar, which had been in service since 45 BC, in favor of the Gregorian calendar, a system that is currently in use today. As a result of switching calendars, Pope Gregory VIII ordered his scribes to add 10 days to the new calendar so that Easter would fall on the correct date. This correction was officially set in motion on October 4th, 1582, which was then corrected to be October 15th, 1582. Though the Pope's manipulation was successful, his time adjustment only accounted for 10 days. However, in the strictest technical terms, the Gregorian chronology was behind by 13 days. Based on these two discrepancies, Illig calculated that 297 years disappeared from the overall timeline of European history. So more red flags. Good to see you. Also, Salted Cedar and Infinite Reach Ministries and Soundlies. Illig looked at three main points of evidence to prove that history had been manipulated. These included the lack of archaeological evidence from this time period, which claimed that Roman architecture appeared long after the fall of Rome in 475 AD. Though outlandish to many historians and archaeologists alike, there is one more writer whose work hinges on these phantom 297 years. Soviet Union mathematics professor Dr. Anatoly Fomenko had a similar belief, which he termed as the new chronology. Though Fomenko was given much credit for the concept, he based his work on the ideas of several other mathematicians and scholars, so math, another red flag here, who had theorized the possibility of a time fabrication in the Middle Ages. Fomenko believed that all of written human history only went back as far as 800 to 1000 AD. This meant that most known documented history began from 1000 AD to 1500 AD. Therefore, human history was actually based on a few individuals that were either duplicated or renamed to contain similar stories. We know history does repeat itself, but that's not what they're talking about here. Fomenko further explored the parallels that existed in certain dynasties and empires to prove the possibilities of regarding the duplication of historical dynasties, kingdoms, and famous historical figures. One of his most famous comparisons was of the kings of Israel, roughly 1040 to 44 BC to 44 AD, and the emperors of the late Western Roman Empire, 300 to 476 AD. In his research, he revealed that his statistical methods, that's what this is based on, showed strong correlation between the history and events that the leaders and reigns of certain rulers in these two regions faced, while in other periods such correlations didn't exist. So that's the claim, that he found an anomaly, basically, and this is what he's going to, what his theory was built on. Illig's questioning of Western history and chronological time has been ridiculed, disproven, and completely debunked on several occasions. However, the question remains why anyone would even suggest ideas that challenge the record of the past. As far, not every detail. I mean, we all know, for example, that the story about George Washington cutting down a cherry tree and then and when his father confronted him, he said, "I cannot tell a lie, I did it." That's a made-up story. There's no evidence that this conversation happened. But they're not talking about that here. They're talking about entire years of everything missing or fabricated. So anyway, going on here, the question remains why anyone would even suggest these ideas. Clearly, it's essential to maintain an open mind to determine what Western history would look like if Illig, Fomenko, and others are right. So we're going to put their claims to the test and they won't be easily debunked, but we'll see. Historically, what does it mean? As mentioned above, the famous conspiracy regarding the phantom time hypothesis, as well as the lesser-known Soviet new chronology hypothesis, makes incredible claims about the possibility of 297 years missing from Western history. Additionally, according to new chronology, it means that history never began until 800 AD. So that's their Russian twist on the thing. If the new chronology is correct, it would mean all of human history only goes back 1,220 years. And if the phantom time hypothesis is correct, it would mean that of those 1,220 years, 297 are missing. Consequently, by combining both of them, it would mean that it is not the year 2020. Does this explain why the world did not end in 2012, according to the Mayan calendar, or why Y2K did not disrupt all computers? Well, the thing is, people would ask those questions, but especially for Y2K and computers, that has nothing to do with missing time. It has to do with programmers of the past not having the foresight to use a 4-digit year. Everybody thought forever is going to be 19-something, and the year was only 2 digits. So that's all that was about. It had nothing to do with any mystery of any sort. If the year 614 to 911 AD never happened, then Charlemagne was utterly fabricated. Secondly, it means that Genghis Khan and Attila the Hun were the same person and paralleled through historical misnaming. Thirdly, it means that all ancient and medieval civilizations such as the Egyptians, Greeks, Trojans, and the late Western Romans and the Anglo-Saxons occurred as an incredibly sped-up 300-year period free of historical bloodbaths. More red flags. So why would Illig and Fermenko suggest such theories if they would result in the concentration of Western civilization to a few hundred years? Could both of them be creating these theories because of a clearer understanding of what the Dark Ages were? So they're raising a question. Is there really something to this? What were the Dark Ages? We have to find out what those were that they say are fabricated. It's commonly believed that the Dark Ages officially started in 476 AD, right after the fall of the Roman Empire, and continued until roughly 1500 AD. This is allegedly a 1,000-year period of feudal terror, chaos, and constant hardship until the beginning of the European Renaissance and the discovery of the New World. However, this interpretation isn't necessarily true. So there's discrepancies or disagreements over what the Dark Ages really were. Various scholars have mentioned that the Dark Ages was a term created by Italian scholar Francesco Petrarch sometime between 1304 and 1374 AD. He described the drastic decay in Latin literacy after the fall of the Roman Empire. Others, like scholars Scott Emmett and Sarah Pruitt, believe that Petrarch's term referred to the decay in Roman European culture due to the lack of historical writing, wealth, changes in architecture, and technology. So they're deciding how to qualify the Dark Ages. Was it decay in the use of Latin, or was it the decay of culture and architecture and technology? After years of parroting Petrarch's sentiment, the common view of Rome's fall in 476 AD became synonymous with the invasions of evil outsiders hoping to destroy Western civilization. Contemporary research reveals that Rome's imperial governmental structure was already collapsing 2 centuries before the official end in 476. One fact to keep in mind that is brought up by Pruitt is that Francesco Petrarch was a Greco-Romophile, who viewed ancient Greece and Rome as the pinnacle of human achievement and dismissed the era that followed as a dark and chaotic time in which no great leaders emerged, no scientific accomplishments were made, and no great art was produced. That's why this person, in their pro-Greco-Roman bias, decided must be Dark Ages because that stuff went away. Now they'll go on here to say, as most of human history proves, empires and regimes may crumble quickly, but they never completely disappear. Countries and cultures merely evolve and adapt to the changing social, political, environmental conditions. With the rise of Christianity starting in the 3rd century AD, the concept, and they're talking about official Christianity now, because Christianity started in 1 AD, the concept of a monotheistic God became more favorable, not invented, but more favorable with the late Romans and eventually much of Europe. Because of the cultural adoption of Christianity over hundreds of years, the papacy slowly filled the void to become the centralizing force uniting most of Europe. So the church state stepped in to fill the vacuum of the Roman Empire. This official Christian church had more power than the kings and queens of Europe and regulated the balance of power among all of them to maintain control. But this does not necessarily mean that Roman civilization was completely eradicated from European culture during the Dark Ages. Instead, Roman civilization simply adapted to the changing times. So they're answering the questions, or the claims rather, of those who coined the term the Dark Ages. Another Dark Age misconception was that technological progress was wiped out. However, many scholars would agree that this was not the case. In fact, the advancement of technology remained slow but continued to progress. Though many building techniques relied on Roman design, the advancements happened incrementally through the buildings of Christian cathedrals and castles by adapting to better masonry techniques and learned from trade and conflict with the Middle East during the Crusades. These technological advances included algebra, using Arabic numerals for mathematical computation, better steel manufacturing, and medical breakthroughs such as bandages. Additionally, farming techniques and record-keeping progressed thanks to the creation of paper, the windmill, the plow collar, stirrups, and metal horseshoes. These advancements far surpassed the technological achievements of Rome, and Europe slowly entered a new era of trade and prosperity around 1000 AD. They got a "the" in there, not sure what that's for. But anyway, there were advancements, and they were important advancements. We just don't think of them as technology, but they were. Though ancient historians may have seen the end of the Greco-Roman antiquity as the end of the world, it was far from true. So if what was originally learned about the Dark Ages was not necessarily true, that is to say, all progress did not abruptly stop, then perhaps the phantom time hypothesis, as well as Fomenko's new chronology hypothesis, are correct. It all depends on how one views their findings. So there really wasn't a Dark Age per se, but that doesn't mean the years are missing. Three fundamental pillars in this hypothesis. The first pillar, on which Elig's theory is based, is an absence of archaeological evidence between 614 and 911 AD. For archaeologists, there is a common belief that only 2 to 5% of the past can ever be discovered. So, of course, it's missing. In simple terms, the farther back one goes in history, the less evidence we have to go on. However, due to the advent of new technology, such as radiocarbon dating, which I'll stop here to say, it is a good technique for a certain limited time range, which I think is in the thousands range. It's certainly not good for millions or billions. That's ridiculous. You just can't do carbon dating that way. But for shorter periods of time, it works pretty well, but you would never use it by itself. They never do, as far as I know. So don't just dismiss it on that. Anyway, because of things like that, a lot of artifacts can be accurately tested. This fact becomes even more impressive when faced with Fomenko's new chronology hypothesis, since he fundamentally discredited and refused to incorporate radiocarbon dating into his findings. Fomenko's theory is purely based on historical evidence using mathematical principles, regardless of what carbon dating reveals from sites in Israel or anywhere else. So then again, there again, I keep stopping on mathematical because math, like a language, is a tool, a descriptive tool. And yes, you can, both in just normal thought and mathematically, you can predict certain things based upon probabilities. And you can be more precise with math sometimes when it comes to probabilities. But that's all it does. It doesn't have to match reality at all. That's why you can't disprove or prove anything with math. Not in the real world. If you can't prove anything, you can't disprove it. So anyone who's using this guy's theory or something like it that depends upon mathematical calculations, they've already shot themselves in the foot because of the fact that math can't prove or disprove. So anyway, Elig's second pillar lies in a discussion of why Roman architecture continued for hundreds of years after the Roman Empire fell apart in 476. The question that is brought up has a straightforward explanation. In layman's terms, Western civilization loved Roman culture and architecture and thus supported the idea that it continued. They did it because they liked it, and they improved on the techniques. Roman civilization did not end abruptly in 476, but slowly adapted and changed. Though power was not centralized, supposed barbarian kings and queens, which replaced Roman governors and emperors, still revered the ways of the ancient Romans and Greeks. Most of these supposed barbarian kings and queens adopted and maintained many aspects of Roman civilization, customs, and legal institutions. Many even considered themselves as continuing the Roman Empire in various ways. Just an upgrade is how they saw it. This reverence for the older ways was honored in the minting of gold coins emblazoned with images of Constantinian emperors. A lot of people who cite Constantine don't know there's more than one. The use of Roman names and titles, and even in the building monuments and pillars based upon the architecture and art forms of Roman techniques. What do we got in Washington, D.C. and a lot of other government buildings? Roman architecture, Greek architecture. Doesn't mean there's something wrong with history. Anyway, the adoration of the old ways appeared to become an ideal that future European leaders wished to uphold and reconstruct, as seen with the Frankish Holy Roman Empire of Charlemagne, who Illig believes never existed. Additionally, though it may appear that Roman architecture was maintained and created as in the past, this simply was not true, though the exteriors of later architectural structures superficially appeared to be similar to Roman ones. They were built with significant technological advancements that far surpassed the Romans in many ways. Let me get to the next part before I look at the chat. The third and most crucial pillar of Illig's argument lies in the technical flaws in both the Julian calendar, which overestimated the length of a year by 11 minutes, and the Gregorian calendar, which was adjusted to add 10 days. Though the adjustments resulting from skipping leap years divisible by 100 and including years divisible by 400 was a method used to keep the Gregorian calendar on track, Illig still was convinced that the Christian church had gotten it wrong. However, Illig was wrong in his analysis of the Julian calendar itself. The miscalculation was that the calendar drifted by 10 days, but the 1582 recalculation actually shows that the count was off by 13 days. That was mentioned earlier. The reason for this miscalculation when the calendars were switched in 1582 was syncing with the older calendar and not correcting the Julian calendar, meaning the delays were consistently 13 days in both calendars and not 10 days. This fabled Julian delay of 10 days was in fact a misinterpretation made by Illig in his translations of the event. Additionally, the Gregorian calendar was not reset to 45 BC, but reset to 325 AD to compensate for the 300 years of shifted dates. They're not missing, they're shifted because of a change in calendars. The last and final fact that disproves both Illig and Firmenko are the sources they used to prove their points. Illig's accounts, as well as Firmenko's, do not seem to take into consideration the abundance of historical documents that exist from 611 to 914 AD. Such sources can be found in Anglo-Saxon English historical records, the Church's historical papal records, Byzantine historical archives, and most significantly, in non-European text and artifacts from the Tang dynasty, as well as the Middle Eastern history, literature, and ethnographies written by Islamic scholars. If Charlemagne did not exist, Emperor Tang Tzu did. An astrological event that was used to sync up a significant amount of European and non-European historical texts and chronologies was the ancient observations of Halley's Comet, which proved to be cited in various documents. I think they mean cited, C-I-T-E-D, in 760, 837, 912, and 989 AD. So we have a regular event of a sky luminary that we call Halley's Comet that has been very consistent and predictable, that has gone on without fail. One has to dismiss those observations as fabrications, and that's begging the question, to say the least. But as I've always said too, all these other dynasties and histories from around the world would also have to be missing the same years, which, depending on who you ask, may be from 300 to 1,000. So anyway, let me look at the chat for a second. I've been kind of keeping an eye on it. Let's see. I personally think quantum theory is esoteric, steeped in Kabbalist ideologies. I would agree, absolutely. There has been work done on that. I think Truth is Stranger Than Fiction channel had something on that a couple years ago, I think now. It's absolutely steeped in that, but there are so-called experiments, the quantum eraser, delayed choice experiment, and so forth, that it's not something I'm going to get into. But the thing is that what they believe because of that is absolutely Kabbalistic. So I agree with that. Anyway, I better go on because we'll see. Like I said, hoping my voice holds out. So what were Illig's and Fomenko's motives? Everybody wants to assign motives, evil intent or whatnot on the part of historical records. But what about these people who supposedly uncovered these fabrications? What about their motives? Always be skeptical of the skeptics. For one thing, there might be some Eurocentric and Russocentric bias at work. That is to say, the skeptics are biased too. Starting with the most general assumption, the theories of these two men dismissed the cultures in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, and the Americas as insignificant and complete historical fabrications. America didn't, there was people in America long before 1776, that's for sure. Moreover, it would allow for both Europe and Russia to rewrite shameful periods in their histories. Talk about motivation. All people look at is the possible motivation for some papacy or whatnot to assign, make their reign begin in the year 1000. But what about this one? Wanting to cover up shameful past events in one's own culture. Creating a revised account would allow for a written history that only focused on the immense achievements of Western Europe and Russia. So there's a good motive too. Now they're going to talk about the calendar a little bit here. Starting with the Eurocentric motives, it would mean that the early Middle Ages could be written as a time of greater development and progress. Between 614 and 911 AD, other cultures such as Islamic culture as well as Tang Dynasty experienced enormous advancements in culture, mathematics, and technology. During the same period, Europe's development stagnated, as there was no central ruling government after the fall of the Roman Empire. If the interpretation of these years in Illig's and Fomenko's theories were wrong, it would mean that Europe experienced the same advancements as the rest of the ancient world. That's what their motive could have been. Whether Illig was aware, consciously or subconsciously, of this possible outcome is yet to be discovered. So nobody's motives on either side can be determined. Okay, so, and thanks for that link, Chow. So we can accuse both the skeptics and the people they're skeptical of having ulterior motives. Because in this case, the skeptics' motives, the ones who started it anyway, seem to have been very likely that they wanted Europe to be advancing at the same rate as the rest of the ancient world, such as the Chinese. The motives for the Russocentric scholars would be similar. It would conveniently place the start of human history on a similar timeline that coincided with the formation of the first villages near Kiev. It would also conveniently dismiss the rise of the Mongol Empire and give more credit to Attila the Hun, thus reconstructing Russian history as an always powerful and evolving culture. In the end, perhaps history is indeed the greatest fiction ever written. So what they're saying here, as their conclusion basically, is that who is it who's really fabricating history? Because it very well could be these skeptics. And I'm pretty sure, even though there are individual exceptions, that most people who repeat this theory and have accepted it haven't considered these honest skeptical questions. So when you hear of any kind of time shift, missing time hypothesis, whatever, phantom time hypothesis, look at this article. I think it's a good one for balance. It's a good one to send people to who are telling you about it. I think it's worth considering. I don't have the time or interest to go deep into that. And the saying goes, the devil's in the details. But the thing is that I think this article from this past July raises enough good questions and defines enough terms that we need to have at least as much skepticism for the skeptics. That's really the takeaway from this. So, other than that, are there any questions or comments about this article or about time shifts in general? I know that this could lead into a side discussion of the so-called Mandela effect, which people used to call having individual timelines, that I've gone over before. I've done Mandela like once a year for the past 3 years, so I don't think I need to do it again, but that's kind of an offshoot of this. But when people talk about missing time, make sure that they're not Eurocentric, and that they consider, especially the Chinese history, because they kept meticulous records. And you have to call it all a lie. You have to call it all a fabrication. Not to mention the fact that, for example, each generation, at least until recent times, meaning the last few generations when Western society is pretty well falling apart, people kept genealogies, right? And they knew, not just from public records, but from their own memories and their own personal documentation, what their grandparents and possibly great-grandparents said happened to them and the events going on in the world that matched what the history books say. And then those people, the great-grandparents, could do the same with their great-grandparents, and so on in an unbroken chain. And you would have to say that lies were being passed by everyone's family, in order to account for a 1,000-year or even a 300 to 500-year gap in history. So, and if people want to say that, some group or another today is the ancestors of slaves or criminals or whatever it is, then you'd have to say, well, if you believe there's 1,000 years missing, then I can say that your belief about my slaving past ancestors is completely fabricated. You can't pick and choose which parts of history you want to be false. That's what these critics here were doing. This Illig and what was the Russian guy's name? I forgot. Oh well, anyway. I know there was another one. Feramenko. Couldn't think of it. Illig and Feramenko. They had their own biases and motivations. And yeah, the Russian one was more math-based, but the math doesn't have to match reality, and it didn't take into account the Chinese or the Africans or the Muslims or anybody else from South America, the Mayans. You'd have to prove beyond doubt that there is no history matching the alleged missing part around the Dark Ages. So anyway, mud flood. I haven't looked into that either, but I keep hearing the term, and everything, little bits that I've seen about it, you could drop the mud part. It's just flood geology aftermath. The Wise Up channel has done a lot of that over the last few years, about the fact that what is deemed ancient high tech is really similar to our own level, maybe a little more advanced, but having been buried by the flood, as that was the purpose of the flood, is to erase those civilizations and start over. They were buried under seawater, and the upheaval of the flood created a very different world afterwards. And that what has been uncovered has a lot of times resembled things like manufacturing systems, submarines, air conditioning units. You can find all sorts of things, and some of these things that look like poured rock were likely more something like sandbags that you don't think maybe people were putting up when they saw floodwaters rising. Sandbags that become mineralized in time, and you can see as when they were exposed to the air that they gradually start leaching lime and other things that run down the face of the rock. So this guy knows a lot about rock and manufacturing, and did a lot of research on it for that theory. But the thing is that this is something you can, you have to weigh all of these things. And when it comes to mud flood term, again, I don't see how it's just mud. I think it's the Great Flood. And that, yes, it's certainly possible when somebody finds something in Western Europe or the Americas that is apparently defying of the technology of the time, it was probably based on something earlier, and technology wasn't that bad as people think. They always think that there's a uniform progression of technology. This is evolutionary thinking, when in fact we've had a roller coaster ride of history of advances and retractions that, or regressions that just keeps repeating, because it's human nature to screw everything up, and it starts over. Things rise, they fall, and they start over. Just like, for example, cave paintings. There are people today who live in caves. People would naturally run to caves after a disaster or some kind of extreme weather change, where if you go underground and not that terribly far, it stays around 50 some degrees all the time. And so people would naturally run to the caves whenever they had a problem like that, or they're hiding from enemies or whatever it was. So, the evolutionists who try to say that history is this long, slow climb, when in fact it's not. So the term mud flood doesn't mean anything to me other than flood. And, I just don't put a lot of stock in why that should explain things that the big flood didn't, Let's see. Looking at the chat some more. Yeah, ethereal is the name of that. Thanks, Chow. Of that one on the Kabbalistic religion being passed off today as theoretical physics. Let's see. So is this the theory that man in your side chat from last week was talking about? His name was Victor. I couldn't tell you for sure. Probably. I think I talked to someone else since then, but I'm not positive because I don't try to remember stuff if I don't need to. But it wasn't until later in the week this week that I even decided to do this topic. So it might have been someone else. I think it was, but it might have been that same person in another place that I ran into. I'm sorry, I don't remember. I just know that it came up again, so I decided to talk about it. Charles Koss talks about the sandbags becoming, okay. Yeah. Can't make mud without water, that's true. Let's see. I think I'm caught up with the chat. But yeah, the whole time hypothesis that, whichever ones you want to pick, that there's missing time, that's a significant missing time, I don't see how that holds up any better than the standard historical timeline. Although I do think the mainstream is wrong about Egyptian history, as I went over a video about that, I don't know, a year or two ago, on were the pyramids covered by the Great Flood. That was a good video, but I had that as part of something else I did. But that was the title of the original video that I saw. It was about the Septuagint and everything, and the fact that the Masoretic text is actually missing, had added or something, I forget which way they went. No, they subtracted something like 600 years from their own history as far as the genealogies and timelines go. So anyway, if you want to find 300 missing years, you got to go BC. And only to the Masoretic text, which isn't BC, but talking about times of BC, they fabricated some past. But not all of, I don't think that we missed 1,000 years and this is really the year 1020 or 1320 or something like that. But anyway. Beyond that, all I'll say again, like I mentioned just briefly when I started out, was that as far as the so-called general election, the selection went, I had said before that I expected two possible scenarios. One is that they kept Trump in office and used it as an excuse for more subversive activities, riots and such, and to possibly call in the UN to take over. And that could still happen because if, for example, they actually successfully overturn some electoral votes because of the rampant fraud that everybody on both sides knows happened. They know it was absolute fraud down to the precinct level where conservatives were not allowed to even watch the vote counts. Other places, the officials in charge were telling people to mark ballots with markers and with Sharpies instead of ballpoint pens, and that invalidated those. All sorts of criminal activity going on. Both sides know it, but very few people actually care. And time will tell whether the alleged lawsuits and challenges will actually mean anything or whether it's more kabuki theater as far as anybody's concerned. The rest of the world is laughing at this advanced Western nation that can't even keep the vote from being defrauded. But the other scenario being that the new guy, the dementia patient, actually stays in office. I mean, gets in and stays. If they uphold the quote-unquote results, that this is just an easier way for them to continue taking away freedoms. There's already talk of mandating the same track and trace app that everybody must have in their phone like they do, I think, in Europe, in England, that somebody was arrested for not downloading the app to track and trace. It's crazy times. There's still a number of scenarios that could play out, but all I know is that we all know it's a farce. We all know it's a circus. And the question is just really a matter of the speed at which certain things are going to happen. And regardless, it's going to be a mess for a long time to come. Things are never going back the way they were. And the rapture is that much closer. That's the good part if you're a Christian. If you're not, well, I don't recommend not, but it's your choice. There's also talk of whether there's been whenever Biden needs to speak publicly without being the babbling fool that he's been caught on camera being in the past, that there's possibility that there's a body double. Body doubles have been used for years and years, not just for presidents, but for any kind of dignitaries around the world, even actors. They have body doubles. I'm not saying clones or not. I'm just saying people who just look like them, or maybe have had plastic surgery. Some have shown pictures where they say some in the, how some people have earlobes that hang down a bit, and some just the bottom of the ear goes straight into their face. That some Bidens have one type and some have another. And this indicates a body double, because we had to all wonder what kind of crazy cocktail of drugs it took to make the dementia patient coherent for the first so-called debate. So we all know there's shenanigans going on. There's nothing that's going to convince me otherwise, and I know anybody with half a brain otherwise, that there's a lot of corruption, and we can't believe what we see and hear, and especially with that thing called deep fake, where you can absolutely put words in somebody's mouth and you would swear it's them. That the visual, the CGI that they can do now, even just watching any, like we were binge watching the old Stargate TV series, right? Because there's, just for something to do sometimes, and because we don't watch regular TV, and going, just remarking every time they would be in quote-unquote outer space. I mean, it's fantasy. It doesn't bother me that it's fantasy. We could say, see how this would pass for the evening news? These graphics that everybody knows is fake. They're not really in space, but it sure looks as real as anything we've seen from NASA. So everything is fake. You can't believe anything you see. It's like there's an old saying, I think, from Will Rogers: don't believe anything you hear and only half of what you see. Of course, you don't know which half to believe. But the thing is that it's all so fake. Everything is so fake. And all we can do is keep, as Christians, spreading the gospel and trying to be as prepared as we can be, whatever that means. So, let's see. We've had more people in the chat. We broke 20 today. That's pretty unusual. Let's see. Any thoughts on using the courts to sue companies imposing laws under the color of law? Yeah, I've been better. Thanks for asking. I've got some sinus things going on, but doing all the home remedies I can do. But as far as using the courts, everything's corrupt. So what are you going to do? Unless you have an army capable of withstanding the rest of the world, including any country you happen to be in at the moment, you'd have to stake out some territory and defeat the rest of the world if you ever want to get rid of corruption. Other than that, it's Jesus' way, which is to change human hearts one at a time and bring back moral fortitude, which is the only way people can remain free, is if there's some kind of agreed upon morality standard which has been completely eroded. That was the first thing they did, and there are quotes going back generations about how the intent to bring down the powerful United States was, first of all, to corrupt its youth, which they did through the schools, through media, every possible venue. And the schools themselves were designed to keep children away from their parents, to make a break between the generation that was very having the Christian ethic, basically, hardworking, having high moral standards, break from them and make them raised instead by their peers and their teachers, who they viewed, they being the humanists, as the priests of a new religion that the once-a-week Sunday schools could not compete with. You can read those quotes from humanists of the past, such as John Dewey and some of his comrades, who absolutely hate Western civilization because it was fundamentally based upon certain moral principles. Well, first you destroy the morality and then nothing else can stand, as we're seeing the fruit of now. Everything is so thoroughly corrupt in every way that this is, like I said, if you're going to the court, you have to remember that if you don't, you have to remember that they are corrupt as well. I'm not saying every individual is, but the system is completely broken, as we saw in this so-called election, down to the precinct level, which is parts of towns. You have corrupt vote counters, and that's all you need. As the old saying goes, I think it was Stalin who said, or being paraphrased, it's not the votes that count, it's who counts the votes. That's always been the case, unless you find a surefire method that doesn't involve hackable voting machines. You have to have a way to ensure one vote per person, that they're all living persons, citizens, and that their votes can't be mistabulated. And that people can't play these games afterwards of, throwing ballots in the trash, by the thousands on the part of postal workers, election officials forcing people to use invalid methods to mark the papers if they're using paper, etc., etc., etc. What's the point in going to court if the courts are corrupt? All right, that's all I'm saying about that. Let's see. Federal laws, they can't count mail-in ballots after Election Day, but they obviously did, absolutely. And who's going to stop them is the question. Decades ago, I watched on Discovery, a learning channel about the Sphinx predating the flood. Shows flood damage at the bottom, not from rain. And the head was altered later. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that I think would. I think Wise Up channel actually did something on the pyramids, so might want to look into that. Clip from the 70s that said Earth is flat. Okay. I remember the episode on Little House on the Prairie where the teacher was trying to tell the children the world was a globe, and the parents were upset with the theory. Yeah, I remember. I've seen that too. What if the standard is already in the law? In God we trust. If we could use the law correctly, i.e. through the way of Christ, maybe we could use a system to get justice. But that depends on people honoring Christ and everything he taught, which they don't. And they use the word Christ in all sorts of different ways. For example, the Jesus of the Quran is not the Jesus of the Bible, because one is a son of God, the other isn't. One died on the cross and rose again, the other didn't, etc., etc. There's all sorts of differences. So they may have the same name, but they're not the same person by their attributes. And that's why there isn't one God for all religions, because it's the differences that matter. It's like saying, people like to say, well, All gods are the same because they're worshipped and they have, this handful of different qualities. Well, that's like saying all people are the same, or like saying I went to your house when I went to somebody else's house because, well, hey, you're both people. You both live in houses. You both have 2 arms and 2 legs, and we eat the same food and all that. We must be the same individual. No, but we wouldn't think that about people. Even identical twins are still different people. And yet people think that because gods have similarities that they must all be the same. It's the differences that matter. And when it comes to quote-unquote gods, they cannot all be the same. They have conflicting characteristics. And so this is why there isn't one God fits all. So, you can't get people all on the same side as long as they don't have the same moral standards and the same authority for the moral standards. Otherwise, it's just opinions. So, anyway, let's see. Wise Up Channel, excellent. The system was based upon Christian principles, but is not being followed. For example, when it comes to, what's a good example? Well, I can pick one. I mean, this election again. Falsifying, making the dead vote. People are lying. They're making things up. And they're forcing other people not to say anything about it. So they're covering it up. Those are not Christian things. The laws on the books may, in many cases, be based upon Christian principles or biblical principles, but they're not being followed because of that. That's certainly not the case. They want to get away from that. The guilty until proven innocent that they've had in Europe, parts of Europe for a long time is certainly not biblical either. Because you have to have 2 or 3 witnesses to say something, an accusation is true. The burden of proof was on the accuser. And that hasn't been the case for a long time in a lot of places. And now, increasingly in the U.S., you're guilty until proven innocent. Because, you can be called racist if you've never been a racist just because you said, that you believe that someone was guilty of a crime and they're the color of race that can't be criticized. Therefore, you must be racist because you accuse them of a crime. Even if you saw them shoot somebody, you would be racist to say so. So those principles are not being followed. That's what I'm saying. Let's see. Islamic records and also exorcism records from the time frame of proto-Islam attribute demons that were exorcised preferring this new belief of Islam. Yes, there's the historical records are of that Allah was the moon god, and there were the family of gods basically of the Quraysh tribe, I think it was. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that right now, but they're not all the same gods, that's for sure. Let's see. What if the people are not asking the right questions in court? I've seen too many people who absolutely did ask the right questions and brought solid cases even to the Supreme Court to get shot down. Now I don't know what's going to happen with the Supreme Court because of the new appointment, but we know that the left is trying to suddenly make more justices on the court so they can pad it again. Absolutely. I mean, if the shoe was on the other foot, and Trump or any conservative tried adding more justices, they would scream bloody murder. But because it's the left, they won't, and the press is all complicit little lapdogs for them, as they have been for a long, long time. But anyway, ultimately, yes, everything is up to God, but that doesn't mean, we can negate the scripture that says in last days, evil people will become worse and worse. So this is prophetic. This is what we expect. Individual faith is still a thing. We can still spread the gospel, and live out the Christian life. But as a government, as a system, it's going to get worse and worse. It just is. I mean, that's prophesied. And not that any of us, because it's prophesied, would not try to do everything in our power to fix it. I would strongly advocate that, trying to fix it. I'm just being, saying that this is what the Bible predicted. It's going to get worse and worse. Hey, Iron Effie also, let's see, I think any Christian political ideas that arise are manipulated by other people for evil ends. I think Trump became a Republican to set up this Democratic tape. Who knows? There's so many different accusations. Some people, even at this point, are saying that it was a sting that Trump's team was operating to let this happen so they can put people in jail for vote fraud. It's a stretch, it's a long shot, but that's what they're saying. I just don't have any confidence in the government being anything but corrupt down, like I said, to the precinct level. It just is. I mean, you have to root it out from deep below the surface to fix it. But in some isolated cases, especially if it doesn't involve some political ideology or somebody's freedom, you can get justice. You can at the lower levels. But whether anything, if the massive blatant vote fraud goes on and isn't punished and is just complained about, then we know the fix is in by both sides. I mean, that would seal it, if it isn't sealed already. Yeah, there's all sorts of dimensions to this chess game, that's for sure. But yeah, you have to change. What we see, I think, is the most disturbing part about all that's been going on is not the officials. We already know that the swamp critters are swamp critters. But the number of ordinary people who are okay with open vote fraud, the number of ordinary people on the street who are okay with mobs looting and burning out of some sense of rage about race or something. If they're okay with that, and they are, then you have a problem with people, not systems. And that's why the systems are corrupt, because the people are corrupt. And they don't want anymore to be responsible for themselves. They want to be perpetual children raised by the state, being told what to do every day. I've met actual people who would rather be told what to do every minute of their life, and they don't care about losing freedom at all. And that's the problem. People today are not willing to fight for freedom. They're not willing to stand up, even in the courts, even in the precincts, and put a stop to it when it was happening. That's when it should have been stopped. The media are complicit, absolutely. They have been the lapdogs of what they call globalists or elitists for a long time, for generations. This was chronicled by Carol Quigley in Tragedy and Hope. He was a historian, wrote a 700-page book about it, Tragedy and Hope is, and quoted and said, this is all farce, basically, to greatly paraphrase. And the media, or who was it who made that quote about the media? It wasn't him, it was somebody else, about having the gratitude that they had toward the media for carrying water for them, basically, because they couldn't have gotten away with it otherwise. So, let's see. Yeah, there are a lot of angry people. There is a mass exodus of Facebook being planned for next week, I think. Or this week, 11th or 13th, something. I can't remember what day they said. I'm not even there. I'm not on social media. But I don't know what it's ever going to prove. And anyway, we all know that the national vote is basically a poll. They choose who they want. They pull whatever they have to pull to make it look like there was an actual choice. And I have an article on my latest, on my social site that I have at WordPress. Let me see if I can get you the link for that. My blog that I just post other things that have nothing to do with Bible study. I post it there, and it was a article that, basically it's just a picture and an excerpt to the article. You can read the whole thing, called I Am Done, the Burning Platform. And it pretty well sums up everything, I think. So, anyhow, yeah, there's a lot of anger on both sides, but yeah, elections are polls. You might have, again, depending on the level of corruption in your local precinct or county, you may still have a vote on local issues, but I don't know how long that's going to last either. I mean, it's becoming communist China for the most part. That'll probably get my video struck just for saying the C word. But there you go. I managed to last an hour. But if you see anybody talk about phantom time hypothesis, send them to this article. And I'm going to shut down and get some more to drink. And hope the rest of you have a nice day. And again, if we're still here next week and Jesus hasn't come, we'll see you then. And remember to spread the gospel. And yeah, the forbidden word is too late. Spread the gospel and remember that that's what we're here for. Because, you know, maybe we'll do prophecy again next week. I don't know. Because too many people, especially Christians, don't know what's coming. So anyway, we'll see y'all later. Thanks for coming. Have a good one.